Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Factory Tour. I'm your host, Paul Patterson, and as always, I am joined by an excellent analyst from Dynasty Football Factory. Today, it's not just a co-worker of mine, it's a very good friend, Chris Miles. You might know him on Twitter as the Draft Director. He creates a ton of content over at DFF. He actually has his own rookie prospect model as well, which supplied all of the statistical analysis for DFF's rookie draft guide this season. So he's the perfect guest to bring on today in the aftermath of a very eventful NFL draft. And also a fun fact, Chris actually invited me to my first Dynasty League a few years ago when I was just brand new to Dynasty Twitter, didn't know what I was doing. I was looking for a league, and he sent me an invite, and we became friends right after that. So it's awesome to bring him onto the show today. Let's get him in here. Let's talk a little NFL draft. Chris, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing great. What an intro that was. I'm a little sad I wasn't your first choice for the show, but, we finally made it. That's all that matters.
I guess I'm just in high demand. Like, I'm really, really sought after to be on the show. No, I appreciate you coming on the show, honestly, at all. It's been great that I've been able to get people to agree to come on and talk with me about all this stuff and bring their insights. So before we get into, all of the nitty gritty, the rookie prospect model and what you think about this class, let's just take a minute. Let's reflect on the draft. Let's talk a little bit about some landing spots we liked, some that we didn't like. And, as Dynasty players, the draft is like a holiday for us. It's really something we look forward to on the calendar all year long. And this year, I got to say the draft felt a little like Groundhog's Day, where we're very excited for these prospects. And then Roger Goodell comes out and he tells us that we've got 6 more weeks of winter, and Tank Bigsby is backing up Travis Etienne, and Darnell Washington is going to back up Pat Freiermuth. And it's kind of like, in a lot of ways, we didn't get what we wanted. So what I want to know is, which rookie landing spot broke your heart this past weekend?
Yeah, as a Dynasty player that's fully loaded on Algier and DeAndre Swift shares, the draft was not fun for me, especially the first 12 picks. But my least
DeAndre
favorite
Swift
spot,
and Tyler Algier, they did not have a great draft weekend, I would have to say. Sorry, go ahead, finish your point there.
So my least favorite spot was probably Tank Bigsby to the Jags. I really liked him as he could have been a 3-down, workhorse, and he's just not going to see that opportunity with Etienne in front of him.
Yeah, I think that one made me a little bit upset as well. I don't think it's a terrible spot for him, just in the sense that it's a good offense, but when you were looking out at some of the other depth charts in the league, like the Bengals or the Cardinals, there were just a lot of juicier spots he could have ended up. And I definitely think he was one of the more well-rounded running back prospects. So it was upsetting to see him go sit behind a younger, more borderline elite running back, where he's not going to get that massive opportunity right away. So that one was a bit of a bummer. I wasn't a big fan of, like I said, Darnell Washington. I thought he was going to be a guy that could go in the first round. He ends up going much, much later to a team that already has a pretty solid pass catching tight end. So it seems pretty clear that the Steelers intend to use him more as a blocker. And while he wasn't a flawless prospect by any means, he really was lacking in the production department. I was excited to see a guy with his athletic ability get drafted highly and kind of take a shot on that for the upside. And now that's kind of gone. So that was a bummer. Any other ones you want to point out?
Yeah, I was just about at Washington too. He was, like you said, an athletic prospect, and I was hoping he could go to a place that he could play right away, but not going to happen in Pittsburgh. Another spot I didn't like was Izzy Abanikanda to the Jets, because again, he's just behind a young stud in Breece Hall. He might be able to get some run in the first couple weeks. Maybe Breece isn't back 100% healthy. He might even see an increase in value after that if he plays well and you can sell him, but as far as like a more longer term, the rest of the season, he's just not going to really see much behind Breece, I don't think.
Yeah, it's like every good running back, like every good young running back got one of these interesting prospects put behind them. Like we have Tank going behind Etienne. We have Zach Charbonnet, who goes to play with Kenneth Walker. We have Abanikanda with Breece Hall. It's like we got a good number of running backs with draft capital. It's just they all ended up in the wrong places in a weird way. So yeah, that landing spot, like, it's good for him as like a potential handcuff, a guy with contingent upside, because I'm not really intimidated by the other backup options there. I think he can pretty easily beat out Zonovan Knight and Michael Carter to be the pure backup. And like you said, he could get some run early on if Brees Hall is banged up. And God forbid if he gets hurt again, he'll have a nice offense there with Aaron Rodgers where he can hopefully thrive. But we just didn't get a lot of these guys that can instantly produce like in the mold of Damian Pierce from last season, where you have this big open runway. Um, and so that is kind of hurting the depth of the class, but we might talk about that a little bit later. Because so much of what you do is tied up in this rookie model that you've created, I think it would be a good idea to just give the people an idea of what your model is, like how it was created, and how you use it to inform your process. So let's just start with how you created this rookie prospect model. Maybe walk us through the origin of that.
So I'm just a numbers guy. I went to school for engineering. I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and I love fantasy football. I just wanted to combine those two things basically. So I started just backlogging a bunch of data for quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and just doing regression analysis against fantasy points per game just to see what stats were and weren't good at predicting points per game. And then after you have, a group of stats that you think are, somewhat correlative to points per game, you can give them weights and combine them into a formula, and you can spit out a score in your model. And then from there, you can take the score from your model spits out and test it against points per game and see how well it actually is predicting these players. So that's kind of where it started, and that's what it's a lot used for, predicting points per game. But I also really love the backlog of data and seeing how, like, early declares or people that had above 2.9 yards per team pass attempt, people that have below 2.9 yards per team pass attempt fare, and it just makes it really good to find players that are potentially undervalued or overvalued.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And it has been helpful for me, that I'm able to access that and see your hit rates for different prospect buckets, based on draft capital or based on certain production thresholds. So I think it's super useful. And I think the numbers speak for themselves for the most part. So let's walk through a little bit some of the numbers that your model gives to you, right? Percentile scores for prospects. Um, I guess let's start there, right? So what are some of the main inputs that can lead to um, a high prospect score? I guess what are the factors that you're looking for when you give a prospect a score in your model?
So across the board, draft capital is one of the most important inputs for any of the positions. And then it kind of depends. Running backs, athleticism matters more than other positions. So that's kind of a bigger score there, like burst score, speed score from player profiler. Um, and then for quarterbacks, it's really mainly production based, like yards per team pass attempt, interception rate, touchdown rate, rush yards per game. And then for wide receivers, it's also more production based. And the big ones there are like early declare status and yards per team pass attempts and target share. And then it's just going back to seeing when I tested them and seeing which ones correlate more or less to points per game to figure out which one is more or less important in the model.
Gotcha. So you got all these different scores. They have different weights to them, right? Creates this recipe for prospect scores. So what I would imagine is that some players score poorly in your model, like Zay Flowers, and then they go high in the NFL draft, right? Like, so Zay Flowers is a guy, just, I know he wasn't incredibly productive in college, comes out as a senior. So, what did your prospect model think of him? And then how does that factor into how you would rank him?
Yeah, so my prospect model, isn't very high on him. He had a low yards per team pass attempt. He wasn't an early declare. But, when you're talking to, because I don't really watch a ton of film, I watch a little bit just so I can see the players. But when I talk to people that do watch film, they can tell me things that, like, Zay Flowers had a awful, awful quarterback. And, if he's getting open and his quarterback's missing him, it's kind of hard to blame it on him. So that's the context that the numbers can't really give me to bump up a guy like Zay Flowers. And then also, when talking to film guys, there'll be a guy like Jalen Hyatt, who he scored as a tier one prospect in my model because his production's so good. But then I go to the film guys and they say, well, Jalen Hyatt's not really creating for himself, and he's being schemed a lot of touches. He scored a lot of long touchdowns on broken plays. It's not really him being good; it's the defense being bad. And I can take that context and put it into my rankings, and I can lower a guy like Hyatt and raise a guy like Flowers.
Right. I think it's super important to get that kind of context. And like you said, if you can find people that break down film that you trust, you can incorporate that into your process. I do think that's kind of also what makes draft capital such an important indicator, right? Because we talk about these two guys, right? Hyatt is a guy that scores high in your model, ends up lower in your rankings. Flowers is a guy that scores lower in your model, ends up higher in your rankings. Well, the NFL draft also told us that, right? Because they took Zay Flowers in the first round. They let Jalen Hyatt slip to the third round. And so that's why draft capital becomes such a good indicator. It's basically like you're getting a film score from the NFL, right? So I know that you do isolate for different metrics, and I know that you have hit rates based on draft capital. So let's just focus on the wide receiver position for now, since that's what we're talking about. But can you tell us, how do wide receivers stack up in round one, round two, and round three? Like, how does that affect their odds of hitting at the next level?
Yeah, so I categorize my players into 4 different categories. They're either an elite hit, a good hit, a usable hit, or they're just a miss. For wide receiver, particularly, a elite hit is somebody who had one elite season and one good season within their first 3 seasons. And an elite season is 16 or more points per game, 10 games played. A good season is 13 or more points per game, 10 games played. So to hit that elite threshold, you have to have one 16 point per game season and one 13 point per game season at minimum. Then to be
Mhm.
considered a good player, you need either one elite season or 2 good seasons. Or to be a usable player, you need one good season or 2 usable seasons, which those are 10 points per games over 10 games. So then for a wide receiver, with those buckets in mind, day one wide receiver hits in my elite bucket at a 24% rate and misses at a 41% rate. And they also have an overall hit rate of 58.6%. Now, you might be thinking that's not great, but really, if you're spending a first round pick on these guys and you're hitting it over a 50% rate, I mean, that's kind of, that's pretty good. That's better than just randomly selecting players in the first round. A typical first round super flex pick has about a 50% hit rate. And then if we go down to like round two wide receivers, they have an overall hit rate of 50%, and they have an elite hit rate of 17%. So we see a small drop off there basically from day one to round two for wide receivers. Where we see our first big drop is when we drop to round three, where our overall hit rate drops to almost half, 28%, and our elite hit rate cuts all the way down from 16% to 4%. So that's where we see a huge drop.
Yeah, and that's why, yeah, that's why it plays such a huge role in the analysis. When you look at Zay Flowers, Jalen Hyatt, even if you thought that those two players were comparable heading into the NFL draft, I personally preferred Flowers for some of the reasons you said. But let's say you had them, relatively close back to back in your rankings. Just from what we saw in the NFL draft, you have to adjust because, like you said, there is a basically a double the odds that Zay Flowers ends up hitting that elite threshold, right? Or actually, it's higher than that for the elite threshold. There's almost double the chance that he ends up a hit of some kind, right? And then you said that
Yep.
there is about a 25% elite hit rate, whereas the third round there was only a 4% hit rate. And we can sit here all day and we can talk about the actual reasons that happens, right? The minutia of like what is going on in terms of opportunity, how do these guys get on the field, right? Why are the third round wide receivers failing? But at the end of the day, the biggest reason is that the NFL has a lot more information about these players than we do. And so we have to be humble in our process, and we have to understand that what they think about these players matters a lot. And so, yeah, I think that that's very telling when it comes to evaluating players as a baseline, right? But then you have all these other metrics that you can use to kind of sharpen the edges of your process and end up with hit rates that are stronger than draft capital alone. So could you walk us through your prospect? Sorry, misspoke there. Your prospect score hit rates, like guys that fall into your best tier. How do they do versus the next tier after that?
Yeah, definitely. So I categorize all my players, whether you're wide receiver, running back, or quarterback, into four different tiers again. You're either an elite prospect, a coin flip prospect, long shot, or an avoid prospect. So if we just look at if you're categorized as an elite prospect in my model,
Mhm.
you have a 41% elite hit rate, you have a 29% good hit rate, a 12% usable hit rate, and only a 17% miss rate. So if we just look at that real quick compared to day one wide receivers, just run through that again.
Mhm.
We have an elite or good hit rate of an elite prospect in my model of 70%. And if you're just looking at day one capital, that number is 38%. So I'm almost doubling your chances of hitting a 13 point per game plus player in two of
Mhm.
their first three seasons. And I'm also, my model, the elite category, their miss rate is all the way down at a 17%, where just a regular day one wide receiver, their miss rate's 41%. So I'm cutting that in more than half too. So you're missing less, you're hitting elite upside good, and it just really is very good at quantifying the players that you want to target at the top end of your draft.
Yeah, and I think that that is a huge edge, especially if you like to play a more probability based approach, which is how I approach Dynasty. I evaluate players, I have takes on players, but at the end of the day, I make choices based on probabilities, right? What is the range of outcomes for a player? What is the odds that they hit a high end ceiling? What are the odds that they are kind of a middle tier player? What are the odds that they're going to bust? And so being able to look at those scores and just sort of quantify where these players fit in a very objective kind of way, that's a really good baseline for making decisions. And from there, you can find context. You can see what the people you trust are saying about these players. But those numbers alone are going to give you a lot more confidence in the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, and
Now,
that's what I love about it. It's objective, it's there's no my bias put in. It's just raw numbers put into a formula and a number gets spit out. That's all there is. There's no like, because we'll have two film guys look at one player and see different things. But I'll take my prospects, I put in the numbers that are given to me, and that's all there is to it. There's no changes that I can make. And it's just it's a perfect way to look at it unfiltered. But that's why my rankings, I can take context and change things later. But I love getting those prospect scores that are just completely unbiased.
yeah, just not having a bias in your baseline evaluation can really help you find the right answer at the end of the day. Now, you said you have different categories for prospects, elite and good, right? So how does this class actually stack up against some past classes? Are there a lot of elite prospects? Are there, more avoid prospects than usual? Like, what does this class look like to you, just surface level?
So this is just purely how my model looked at them, not how they actually performed. 2023 has four elite prospects and 10 good prospects for 14 good plus prospects. Those elite prospects are Bijan, JSN, Quentin Johnson, and Jordan Addison. None of the QBs made it to the elite tier. They're just under the elite tier. I think the elite tier is like 86 and they scored 84s, but they still didn't make it. So that number 14, that at least fills out and goes past the end of your first round of your rookie drafts. But if we look at previous years, 2022, we had 17 good plus prospects. 2021, we had 18 good plus prospects.
Mhm.
2020, we had 22 of them. 2019, there was a little drop, only 11 good plus prospects. 2018, though, we're back to 19, and 2017, 23 good plus prospects. So really, overall, out of the last seven draft classes, this is bottom two according to my model, how my model views them as prospects.
Right. So yeah. So there's on paper not as strong of a class. You said that the quarterbacks. So you mean I assume you're referring to the top three were just below that elite tier, but they are
Yep,
in the good tier.
they are in the good tier.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. They're not, totally flawless. I'm kind of surprised that someone like Bryce Young doesn't hit the elite tier. Is that due to the rushing component?
Yeah, it's due to the rushing. For at least because this is a fantasy prospect model, not
Mhm.
an NFL quarterback model. The rushing is a heavy component in it, and without Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud hitting that rushing upside, they just don't reach the elite tier. And then with
Right.
Anthony Richardson, who does hit it, he just misses all the other passing
Yeah,
thresholds.
every single one. Yeah, every single passing threshold, unfortunately.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean they're bad picks, and we're going to talk through them in just a second. Um, I did want to add a little bit of context, which is that you do not prospect tight ends. And so when you consider that this is probably the strongest tight end class that we've seen in a number of years, that does kind of fill in the edges a little bit where it might fall short on the wide receiver, running back, quarterback prospects, but it doesn't fall short in the tight end department. So that sort of adds a little bit more depth to it. And that kind of gets you through the middle of the second round of your rookie draft with those guys you can feel pretty good about. It's just hard to model tight ends. It's so hard to identify what exact traits and qualities are going to create a good tight end because there just aren't that many tight ends that are relevant. And so you can't even create like a large enough database to quantify it. Like there are some baseline things that I know from people that I listen to, like some things about athleticism, and obviously guys that are drafted earlier are going to get more opportunities, but you just can't really boil it down to an exact science as much as you can with those other positions. So we can talk about the tight ends. We're not going to have scores for them, but there aren't any tight ends in the top 6 of the rookie draft consensus. There are 2 running backs, 3 quarterbacks, and a wide receiver in the top 6. We've got Bijan in whatever order you like them in. Bijan Robinson, Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Those are the top 6 picks in pretty much every rookie draft that you're going to see. So I guess my question, Chris, is what order do you have those 6 in, and has that changed post draft?
So currently, I would have Bijan at 1, and then Anthony Richardson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And it actually did change a lot from what I had pre-draft. I had JSN higher. I thought he was going to get drafted higher. I thought he'd probably go to a better landing spot where he can make a big impact year 1. I had Anthony Richardson lower because I was afraid of his passing floor. But with the investment that the Colts made at 104, I think that it makes him a much safer prospect. And then when you add that safety to his already undeniable upside, it just makes him a clear pick at the 1.02 for me.
Well, I was going to give you the exact same list. So I'm going to say that you probably copied off of my notes. I had them in that same order. And honestly, I was expecting to hear you say Gibbs a little bit later because you didn't list him as one of your elite prospects in this class. And I was about to fight you right then and there because I think Jahmyr Gibbs is absolutely an elite prospect. But it looks like we aren't going to have a physical altercation if you have him as high as 103. You clearly understand the logic behind the Jahmyr Gibbs pick. But let's just go through these guys one at a time. We'll touch on them pretty quickly. Like I said, they are the top 6 consensus, so everybody knows that these are the guys you want. We don't need to belabor the point. With Bijan, there's really nothing else to say. He's exactly the guy that we thought he was. He went in the top 10. He went to really a great landing spot. You know, this is a team that wants to run the ball in Atlanta and has a great coach as far as scheming the run game. I don't think he's a great coach as far as winning Super Bowls, but he can scheme the heck out of a run game. Caleb Huntley was incredibly efficient last season. And yes, Tyler Algier is there. He's not going to be a roadblock for Bijan Robinson. He is going to be bringing Bijan some fresh hot coffee on the sidelines every practice, but he's not going to take work away from him. So he's the 101. Take him at 101. Please don't take anybody else. Chris, do you agree? Unanimous 101, no exceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no situation that I would not take Bijan. Even if I heard this argument a lot, if you earned the 101, your team isn't good, you should take a quarterback because, Bijan's making an impact and it's not helping you win. But I don't think it's a good idea to just bleed value unnecessarily by taking a lower valued prospect just because of your team situation. When if you can't trade back, you should just take Bijan and you can hold him until the season when he's scoring points. And people are all of a sudden going to say, okay, he's real. I'm now willing to pay these prices for Bijan. But also you can see contenders where they get injuries, like Jamar Chase could have a season-ending injury, Justin Jefferson, Kyle Pitts, any of these guys that are young, elite assets could have season-ending injuries. And all of a sudden you as a rebuilder or your team's not very good, you say, hey, I have this elite young running back I can give you. You give me your injured young elite asset and with maybe some stuff on top even, and all of a sudden you're helping your team and you wouldn't have been able to do that if you didn't take Bijan first.
Yeah, I really can't say it any more clearly, right? You know, you look at startup ADP, Bijan Robinson is always going the first of these rookies, and he's usually going a good bit ahead of them. He's right there in the mix with quarterbacks that we know are really good, right? Quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray, even Lamar Jackson when he slips down the board, right? So if you need a quarterback, your best bet is to try to move that 101 for one of these quarterbacks we know are good. And that's usually easier said than done in actual leagues, like outside of your startup. But at least try, right? And if you can't get that done, yeah, take Bijan, wait until the season. You don't have to worry about your team rebuilding right now. It's May, okay? You're not winning or losing any fantasy games for several months. You have time to sell him. And as the season approaches, people are going to realize, oh, wow, this rookie running back is a top 5 redraft pick. Wow, he's probably a guy I want on my dynasty team, right? It was not that long ago that Jonathan Taylor was valued right on par or ahead of Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. He was right up there in the top 5 or top 3 picks in startup drafts. So just because he's fallen off a little bit and we've seen kind of a little decline from the running back position, that doesn't mean Bijan can't achieve those heights, right? He's like 21 years old. He's one of the best prospects we've seen in a long time. And he absolutely has more room to grow in terms of his value. So just take him at 101. Don't overthink it. At 102, we both agree it's Anthony Richardson. He has the ceiling, obviously, if he can put it together to be like a Josh Allen type of quarterback. Not saying that that's likely, but it absolutely exists, and it doesn't exist for these other quarterbacks. So that's why I've got him ahead. And like you said, the Colts invested in him heavily, right? So we shouldn't be worried about a total drop off from Anthony Richardson. Even if he struggles as a rookie, he's going to maintain his value. We've seen this from Zach Wilson. We've seen this from Daniel Jones. These guys can come into the league, be absolutely egregious players, and they will still go just as high as they went the last offseason because people like young quarterbacks and they understand that they have value insulation. So you're really getting a high ceiling and a pretty high floor with Richardson, which wasn't the case before the draft. But now that we know he's that top 5 pick, it absolutely exists. Let's talk about Gibbs. Tell me why he's your 103.
Before we move to Gibbs, I do want to just spit some facts about Anthony Richardson. So
Please do.
if you filter top 5 quarterbacks that hit 30 or more rushing yards per game in their best college season, which isn't a very large number, it's only 30 rush yards per game. You get 7 players with 3 seasons or more of NFL data. You have 5 elite hits, which is a 71% rate, and 2 good hits, which is a 29% rate. And that right there is 100%. So 100%
Yeah.
of those players were scoring 17 points per game in 2 of their first 3 seasons or more. And 71% of them were just scoring 20 points per game in 2 of their first 3 seasons or more, right out of the gate. And that is a category that Anthony Richardson falls into.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy for these Russian quarterbacks to score fantasy points. That's why we like them so much, right? If he comes into the league and he averages 60 rushing yards a game and half a touchdown, then he basically needs to throw for like 150 yards and a touchdown in a game, and he's going to be a QB1 that week. Like, it's
Yep.
so achievable, right? And so even if he's a bad passer, like, he's still going to score fantasy points while he's on the field. The only thing you need to worry about is whether he's going to be on the field. And as a top 5 pick, we can be confident he's going to be on the field. Like, I understand everybody has a little bit of whiplash with Trey Lance, but it's a bizarre situation with Trey Lance, right? Where he was a backup on a playoff bound team. He gets the job and then immediately breaks his ankle. Like, you couldn't draw up a worse script for Trey Lance. And I still think he's going to get a chance to start, whether it's in San Francisco or somewhere else. I'm willing to buy him on the low, but not really a Trey Lance show that we're doing. The point is, AR has the ceiling and he has a higher floor than you think. I looked at top 10 quarterbacks since 2011. Every single one of them, with the exception of Josh Rosen, who is always going to be that one guy that just couldn't do anything in the league, and Jake Locker, who dealt with injuries. Every other quarterback, I believe it was 22 quarterbacks, they all started at least 27 games over their first 3 seasons. So that's almost 2 full seasons, right, of starting games. And that includes players that did have injuries or didn't start right away. These guys get on the field because the teams have made such a massive investment in them. They have to see what they have. So Richardson's going to get out there. He's going to play. You're going to have 2 seasons to see what you have in him and see if he can actually develop. And if not, you're going to be able to pivot off of him without losing much, if anything at all. So I think we've definitely covered that.
Yep.
Let's go to Jahmyr Gibbs then, who went 12th overall, shockingly, to the Detroit Lions. And then DeAndre Swift was traded shortly thereafter. So he's playing in Detroit with David Montgomery. Um, what is his situation looking like, and why are you willing to take him above Young and Stroud?
So I mean, it's really just another numbers game. If you take Jahmyr Gibbs, a running back with his production profile and his draft capital, and you combine those two things, you get a player that has historically 100% overall hit rate. These players just don't miss. They score. They are usable fantasy assets in their first seasons. Um, if you take that combination of players, I have some average points per games that they score. On average, running backs drafted in the top 15 with Jahmyr Gibbs' production profile score 19 fantasy points per game. Year 2, they score 18 fantasy points per game, and year 3, they score 23.3 fantasy points per game on average. And then these aren't film comps; they're just purely number comps. But he comps very favorably to Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley, just from a pure number perspective. Nothing about how they play or move or anything like that. So I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, with the surprising draft capital that he got, I mean, he is a elite running back prospect, and he should be already a top 5 dynasty running back pretty easily, I'd say.
Absolutely love that. You're speaking my language. I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm totally taking him at the 103. I have already taken him at the 103 in a draft. And I just think that his upside is being a little bit undersold by people. There are a few factors in play, right? And the main one is just that he's under that 200-pound number, but we do have some hits in that type of weight range, right? Christian McCaffrey is absolutely one of those guys. Came into the league at 202. That's just a 3-pound difference. I understand it's over 200 pounds, but when you're controlling for that kind of a weight range, they're certainly in the same bucket in terms of their size. He came
Yeah, I
in
want to talk about
and
that real quick too.
yeah, go ahead.
People are throwing around this 200-pound number all of a sudden because Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't hit it. I mean, in my threshold, I look at 210 pounds actually. So Christian McCaffrey also doesn't even hit that. There's a lot of players that are added in when you look at least my standard threshold, which I found to be correlative of 210 pounds. So I just don't think it's fair that all of a sudden we're saying 200 pounds and Jahmyr Gibbs misses it by 1 pound. And like you said, Christian McCaffrey is only 3 pounds heavier. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, no, that's a great note. I think 200 pounds is pretty arbitrary. And you look at, there are a lot of guys in that 200 to 210-pound range that have made an impact. I believe Aaron Jones is in that range. Tony Pollard is in that range, right? So there are running backs that are in a comparable weight class to Jahmyr Gibbs that we've seen have highly relevant fantasy careers. And if you go back even further, you can pull in guys like Jamal Charles, Chris Johnson, CJ Spiller. These guys exist. And the fact that Gibbs went so high in the draft, which wasn't really expected ahead of time, that just gives him that much more security as a prospect, right? Like Christian McCaffrey went 10th overall. And leading up to the draft, if you would compare Jahmyr Gibbs to Christian McCaffrey, most people would just say, well, McCaffrey went top 10. You can't really compare him to Christian McCaffrey. Well, okay, he went 12th overall, right? So that's very much the same range of draft capital. If you look at their receiving profiles, very much in the same realm as receiving prospects. He's an incredible receiving prospect. I will grant you, he was not the workhorse in college that Christian McCaffrey was on the ground. And so the question with Jahmyr Gibbs is, what is his rushing work going to look like? The thing is, you're going to be able to find that out in his rookie season, and you're not really risking anything because rookie running backs gain value, like first and second rounders specifically. If you look back over the past several seasons, every single running back prospect that entered the league as a first or second round pick was more valuable the year after. It doesn't matter who you look at, right? Cam Akers played basically 3 games as a rookie. He gained ADP. J.K. Dobbins didn't handle a full workload as a rookie. He gained ADP. Najee Harris was incredibly inefficient as a rookie. He was not good at football, but he got a lot of touches. He gained ADP. Travis Etienne missed his entire rookie season, but by the time the next year kicked off, he was still more valuable than he was when he entered the league. Like, it's foolproof, basically, right? Kenneth Walker came in. He was not nearly as good at playing running back as guys like Chris Olave or Drake London were at playing wide receiver. And yet he goes ahead of them in startups, or at least he did before Pete Carroll went ahead and grabbed another running back in the second round. So Jahmyr Gibbs, it's like he has sky high upside. Like, he could have 100 targets in his rookie season. That is not hyperbole. Saquon Barkley did it. and Jahmyr Gibbs could absolutely do it, especially in this offense with Jared Goff, who checks down like crazy. The offense runs a lot of plays. It could 100% happen. DeAndre Swift had like a 15 or 17% target share just last season. So that's absolutely possible. And even if he doesn't do that, like even if there are clear flaws in his game, the market is going to make excuses for those flaws, and he's going to be in the same range, if not more valuable going into the next year. So I just think it's a really, really strong investment. Whereas in those next two guys, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, I think they're also very safe. I just don't think they have the same upside relative to their position that Jahmyr Gibbs does, like that ability to supply value over replacement that Jahmyr Gibbs does at running back. So do you see the same thing with Young and Stroud, and how do you actually differentiate between those two?
So with Young and Stroud, I have them. I mean, they scored the same exact in my model. I have them right next to each other. I really only have Young over top because he went first in the draft and Stroud went second. That's just how hair thin it was. If you have these guys so close together, you need something to use to separate them, and that's what I chose to use. But I have Gibbs over them because if we look at what we did earlier with Anthony Richardson, I mean, we can look at top 5 picks that didn't hit 30 rush yards per game, and we're still looking at 100% overall hit rate, but it's a 33% usable hit rate and a 67% good hit rate. There hasn't even been one elite hit from a top 5 pick that doesn't have that 30 rush yards per game. So if these guys are praised for their floor, they're high floor players. They're going to be like, the people say Kirk Cousins and Dak all the time. And that's great. Those are great guys to have at your quarterback position, but they lack the elite upside that a player like Jahmyr Gibbs has. And that's why I want Gibbs over them. But within their own rights, they are still good picks, and they absolutely deserve to be picked in the top 6 of this class.
So just for my own clarification, so guys like Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, did they hit that rushing threshold in your model?
Yeah, they were all well over it. Trevor Lawrence had 38 rush yards per game. Okay, maybe not well over it. Joe Burrow had 31 rush yards per game. I mean, it's just 30 rush yards is actually not a lot. Baker Mayfield had 31 rush yards per game.
Right. Yeah, I don't think people realize quite how immobile Young and Stroud actually were in college. And that doesn't mean that they can't necessarily be mobile in the NFL. It's just highly, highly unlikely that they're ever going to be more than like a Ryan Tannehill level scrambler, right? They're not going to run as much as Daniel Jones. They're not going to run as much as even those kind of second tier Konami quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott, maybe pre-ankle injury. They're not going to be like that, right? They're going to max out at a couple hundred rushing yards per game at best. And so with that being said, their path to being top 5 like dynasty startup picks or league winning quarterbacks is basically to be the best passers in the NFL. Like they would have to be Joe Burrow level passers.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think along with that, they would have to be in a situation like Joe Burrow is, where he has some of the best weaponry in the NFL. Like to be able to be that top 5 fantasy quarterback without the rushing component to your game, you have to throw for like 40 touchdowns, 5,000 yards. Like you need to be massively efficient. It's just such a harder path for those guys as opposed to Anthony Richardson and what he has to do in order to be that type of a quarterback. Like he just needs to be an average passer and not get benched. That's basically his whole criteria. So with that being said, I'm willing to swing for that upside, and I can fall back on the floor of a Stroud or a Young if I need to, but I'm really trying to get those two guys ahead of him, Richardson and Gibbs. For me, there's kind of a soft tier break there where I didn't expect one heading into the draft, but just seeing how well things went for Richardson and Gibbs, I kind of have them a little tiny step above, and I would be willing to give up a small piece to get up and get one of those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, people compare him to Dak's rushing ability a lot. Dak in college had 10 times the rush yard per game that Bryce Young had and 20 times rush yard per game that CJ Stroud had. He had 76 rush yards per game. Bryce Young had 7.5 and CJ Stroud had 4.4. Like it's actually crazy how little these guys rushed in college. I mean,
yeah, it is very low. I looked at some of the other like statuesque quarterback prospects like Mac Jones or Mason Rudolph, and they're like right there with those guys. Like they just don't run. I think they're a little more athletic than those guys, but they actually have to have that tendency in their game. And they haven't shown it if they have it. So That means we have one guy left in our top 6, and that's Jackson Smith and Jigba. He is a great prospect. Obviously, had that incredible season with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, where he was that top dog in the Ohio State offense. He still went in the first round, although he went a little later than we expected. And he went to the Seahawks, which was kind of an unexpected spot, I think. And like you alluded to earlier, I think it could impact his opportunity in year one. He's less likely to get like a, Drake London-esque 29% target share in Seattle. So it just kind of hurts him right out of the gate. And so that makes it a little bit less exciting to grab him because he's probably not going to see the same kind of like prolific usage and prolific value gains that we've seen from some of these other wide receivers.
Yeah, and there's not going to be a chance to buy him either. People like to say rookies have these down rookie years and then you can just buy him later. I mean, Kyle Pitts had a bad rookie year, or at least not bad, but not what we were expecting. And his value went up. So, JSN, he's not going to have, some crazy 25% target share or anything behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't draft him. We're playing Dynasty. He's going to hold his value. And if he plays well, I mean, who knows? He could overtake one of them, be one of the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 on the team. And then all of a sudden his value could go up. He could become a top 2-round startup pick. And it's a bet I'm willing to make because he is such an elite prospect. Anything can happen to these players. Tyler Lockett could get hurt. DK Metcalf could get hurt. One of them could get traded. They could get suspended. Anything can happen. JSN is an elite prospect. You need to bet on the prospect.
Oh yeah. So I do not mean to undersell what he is as a prospect. I'm happy to grab him at 106. Like I'm not out on JSN based on the landing spot. It just doesn't have quite as much opportunity open. So like he's not going to be a guy that you can really bank on as a contributor in year one. But I don't think he's likely to face plant by any means. I'm sure he's still going to put up solid, yards per out run numbers, and he's still going to earn his targets. He's still going to have some big weeks. It's just that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are very good wide receivers in their own right. And I don't think we can just expect him to kind of push those guys aside. You could see all three of them kind of suffer a little bit because of this, where they're all earning closer to like 21% target shares, and nobody can actually dominate the target tree. But it's still not a terrible spot by any means, and he is going to get opportunity. It's just he's not going to get that like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson kind of landing spot where he's going to get every down, every opportunity to earn a massive target share right away. So just a slight ding. Still a guy I want to invest in. Still the clear wide receiver 1 in this class. We can both agree on that.
Yeah, I didn't want to sound like I was trying to disagree with you. I agreed with what you were saying. I just wanted to reinforce why we're still picking him so highly. And, as crazy as it is, somebody took Jordan Addison over him in one of my rookie drafts today, which is just
don't do that.
Absolutely blasphemous.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. You still want to get him. You still want to invest in him. And don't let me lead the people astray. You got to keep me in line here. So JSN clear 106, and then teardrop. Okay, don't take Jordan Addison over him. He is in another tier. We have 3 wide receivers basically that come off the board right after JSN. That's Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers. Sometimes you get a Dalton Kincaid mixed in there, who's a guy that I'm pretty high on. I discussed those 3 wide receivers last week with Jagger May. So we kind of went through the order with those guys. Personally, I've got it Addison, Johnston, Flowers. Chris, I believe you have it Johnston, Addison, Flowers. You're kind of splitting hairs there. You can take the guy you want to take. It isn't that big of a deal. But after those guys, it feels like to me there's a big drop off. Like there's 3 wide receivers. There's Kincaid. I'm kind of fine with those guys up to that 110 spot. And then after that, it just sort of falls off a cliff. Like there's nobody that I really, really want to take at 111, 112 if those guys are gone. Have you found that to be the case as well?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly how I would describe it. There's sort of like a mini tier, I would say, of Will Levis, Charbonnet, Achane, I guess Kendry Miller's in there too. And then after that, you hit the real steep cliff. But yeah, I mean, after Kincaid at 110, it is definitely a drop. There's like a 3-4 player tier, and then there's just an absolute cliff at 2.03.
Yeah, so it kind of is weird how the rookie class shook out, where it feels like it's still pretty deep. Like there are guys that I like taking in the late second, in the third round. Like there are guys that I'm interested in. It just feels like there's no player that is worth the 111. Like someone has to get taken there, but there's no guy that I actually think like, oh yeah, he should be the 111 in a rookie draft. Like heading into it,
Hmm.
I would have expected to be more excited about the player that I'm getting there. So, if you have those picks, 111, 112, what are you actually doing? Are you trying to get rid of them? Are you trying to move up? What are you doing with those picks?
So I'm definitely before my draft starts and people, see where the players are actually going. I'm trying to move those picks obviously into the top six if I can, and I'm adding a lot to do it. I moved a 110 and 3 mid-seconds to get into the top six in one of my drafts, just because I mean it's such a big jump.
Hmm.
But if I can't do that, I'm trying to move into the top eight to get, or even top nine, depending on how you view Flowers. And if I can't do that, I don't even really want to move back. I don't like the mid-second. I want to move back all the way back to the late second. I've seen a lot of people selling these picks for like 1.11 straight up for like Amari Cooper or Deontay Johnson. Like those are trades that I love. I would love to buy players like that. And to your point, where there's not really anybody that there's like worth taking at the 111. After the Swift trade to the Eagles, and people seem to be happy about that landing spot. I was like, okay, I'm going to try to sell some Swift for late first round picks, and then went to after the draft completely finished, went to look at it, and I was like, I don't want my 1.11 for Swift anymore. I'm trying to get
Yeah.
a 24 first there, or trying to package him to get to the mid first. This 1.11, 1.12 is just not up to par from normal classes.
Yeah, I would not be buying these picks. That's certainly the last thing that I would do. Like if I was going to make a flow chart of decisions based on late first round picks, the last option would be buying them, and before that, it would be jumping off of a bridge. So, what you want to do is, yeah, I like the idea of trading them straight up for players, like you said, an Amari Cooper type, or maybe a Deontay Johnson or something, or trying to package them to move up. I made a similar trade to what you described. I moved the 108 and the 201 in a draft to get into the 105 spot.
You sure did.
Yeah, you're in that league, and I would have been happy to pick there, honestly, but I had an opportunity to trade up again to the 101. This sucker that I was trading with was willing to give away Bijan. He may or may not be in this stream right now, but I did trade the 105, Treylon Burks, and Rashad White to get all the way up and get Bijan Robinson. That might seem like a big overpay, and honestly, like I don't think that I fleeced Chris or anything in that trade, but it was a league with only 9 starters and only 2 wide receiver slots. So I felt comfortable like giving up some depth to go up and get like a true difference making elite asset. And so, altogether, I moved a whole bunch to go up and get Bijan. But when you actually look at the players going in those slots, those late first, early second slots, it's not as bad as it looks on paper. So I would be looking to trade up or trade out. Um, But let's say you can't, right? Let's say your league is wise to this tier break. They don't want those picks either. What are we going to do? We have to pick somebody. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Dalton Kincaid is the 110, because that's who I have at 110. You're just going to have to go with it. Dalton Kincaid is the 110. So you have the 111. There are a bunch of guys on the board that you could take. Who are you going towards? Is there one guy that you think you would take most of the time, or does it kind of depend on situation?
So in that range, I'm pretty much always I'm looking to take, a Chain and Charbonnet. Those are my top two choices for sure. And then if I'm forced into it, I like Kendre if he's there. I like him enough that he's there. But mainly, I mean, Charbonnet I think he's getting devalued for this landing spot. I think he's going to actually split a lot. He's going to get the high value touches also, the receiving work and the goal line work potentially. And, if something were to happen, always got to play for that pure upside. If Kenneth Walker gets hurt, I mean, Charbonnet is a top 12 running back easily for the rest of the season. And I think that he should be a priority at the end of this first round. Like that's who I'm targeting in this range.
Interesting. So I think we finally have reached our first true point of disagreement on this show. Charbonnet would not be my target. I agree with some of what you said. Like, I think he would have a lot of contingent upside if Kenneth Walker got hurt. I also think he is going to get some high value touches in that offense. I definitely think they want to use him on passing downs. He may even see some goal line. What I don't think is that he's really going to have a lot of standalone value without an injury, because I do think Kenneth Walker is a better rusher. I think they still want him to be highly involved. And I think the best case for Charbonnet is like a straight split. I don't think it's likely that he ends up getting more than like a 50% opportunity share. So I don't see a ton of upside. Like, I think AJ Dillon kind of landed in a similar spot as a second round pick to a team that had a good running back already. Now, I think Charbonnet was a little better prospect. He's also more likely to be used as a pass catcher than Dillon was, just based on Aaron Jones' skill set versus Walker's. But I think we could see something similar happen where he just doesn't get the usage that we want. And he's probably going to drop in value. He's not going to be a guy you can put in your lineup. So I still have him in that tier, but I would definitely be taking Devin Achane over him just based on the opportunity that's available in Miami. I also think you could take a Will Levis as much as I think it's kind of a gross pick. If you're really desperate at quarterback, like you need upside at that position. Like maybe you have a team that's really low value. You don't have a lot of starting quarterbacks. Levis is a guy I could justify at 111 where once he gets on the field, now he's like a bargaining chip for you, right? Because it's so hard to trade for a quarterback without giving one up. So once he's playing, he could fall into that kind of Kenny Pickett, Jordan Love range, even if he's not all that good. And you could use him in a trade. And so I feel like there are situations where I would take him there. The last thing I would consider is these tight ends. You didn't mention Michael Mayer or Sam Laporta, but I'm pretty high on these guys. They play a position of scarcity. And so I could definitely be talked into like someone like Michael Mayer at the 111. Is there a reason that you're more hesitant on the tight ends there?
I was just leaving, some meat on the bone for you. I have all three tight ends in my top 16. So they're right there for me also. I love Laporta, actually. The value he goes late second, mid second in these drafts a lot. I'm loving the Laporta value. And I do agree, Will Levis, it's a value pick. He probably honestly has the most upside there if he actually does hit. It's just what are the chances of him hitting is the big question. I like a Shane. He's actually the RB4 in my model, and Charbonnet is the RB2 in my model. So that's just the hair split there. It's really due to the draft capital. If you look at round 2 draft capital for running backs, overall hit rate is 67%, and round 3 draft capital is 48%. So you're kind of losing 20% of value right there. That's just my main argument for Charbonnet over the other guys. But I'm not afraid of drafting these tight ends at all. And like you said in the very beginning of the episode, this is one of the best tight end classes we've had in a long time. And like I said, I have 3 of them in my top 16. I think that these are guys that you could also be targeting in the early second. It's just that their ADP isn't quite there, which is why we could maybe wait on them a little bit.
Yeah, in my experience, Laporta does go third out of the 3. I have seen Mayer make it into the first round, or he usually goes by the early second at the latest, where Laporta goes a little later. So that's why I wouldn't be considering Laporta at 111. I just think it's too much of a reach based on ADP. I would be trying to position myself in a tier to get him, later on 204, 205 maybe, but very comfortable taking him. Those 3 tight ends I think are really strong bets to be contributors, maybe not fantasy contributors to your lineup right away, but contributors on their offenses and being able to kind of flash what the future could hold for them. So I think that they will store value well, and they're guys that you're probably going to want long term more so than some of these other players. With Charbonnet, I totally hear you with the second round versus third round. Like I definitely in a vacuum would take a second round running back over a third round running back in most situations. I think just the context of the 2 offenses that these players are going to, where Charbonnet is going to be behind or at least alongside another proven good NFL running back who's entering his second season. That is just such a significant ding for me on the context front. Whereas Devin Achane is going to a team that has Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. These are older running backs that have had durability issues, that are clearly past their age apex, and he's going to like the perfect offensive fit with Mike McDaniel, where they want to play fast, they want to get the ball in space, and I think he's the right kind of coach to utilize him, where he can look past that weight and actually see him like as the talented player that he is. So a little bit more of a narrative driven analysis there. I will grant you that. But if I have to choose between the 2, I think I'm taking Achane. I'm happy to get both of them. It's just kind of, gun to my head. Which one would I take? So all those guys, all in a tier. We didn't talk about Kendre Miller. I do think, like you said, he belongs in that tier somewhere. But for me, he's comfortably after those other 2 running backs. I just didn't like him as much as a prospect. He lacks pass catching upside, but there's no denying he is in a favorable spot in New Orleans because we don't know what the future holds for Kamara. Jamal Williams, I don't think is like too much of an obstacle. He's really not a very good rusher. And so Kendrick could fall into some opportunity early if Kamara gets suspended or traded or cut or something. And that is a little bit tantalizing, right? Could you tell us a little bit about Kendre Miller's profile? Like, what did you see in him and how does he score?
Yeah, so Kendre actually moved up from the RB16 of my model to the RB9 with draft capital. And, I like having him in that tier. And I actually took him 2.01 in a 14 team league, so 15th overall. So I am drafting him. He actually has a pretty good profile. He only slightly misses in a couple thresholds, which keeps him down at RB9. But I
Mhm.
mean, like you said, Kamara could get suspended. Jamal Williams is definitely getting up there in age. I mean, Kendre Miller could come in and have an immediate impact, and he could definitely gain value and show that he was worth a good pick. One other thing with this class that we just find weird, this value pocket in the mid second. A guy I would like to take here is Marvin Mims, or but his ADP is just
Not Denzel Mims. We don't want
not
Denzel
Denzel
Mims here.
Mims.
No,
No,
no, no, no. No relation, by the way. There was
sorry,
a
I
false
had
report that they were
Mims.
brothers.
Yeah,
They are not brothers. So no relation. You can take Mims with confidence. So tell us about Marvin
yeah.
Mims.
I had Marvin. I just had Mims written down. That was, I've been whatever. But yeah, so Marvin Mims, but his ADP is in the late second, so I just don't consider him in the early second. But in terms of my model, I mean, Marvin Mims, he's the wide receiver 5 in my model. He hits every threshold except for Dominator, which he misses by 2.5%. He got round 2 draft capital. I just think this is a guy that's being kind of criminally undervalued right now in rookie drafts and should be going at minimum 2.05, 2.06. And his ADP is 2.11. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, we just keep agreeing on this show. It's I don't think it's very good content, but hopefully people get something out of it. I agree with Mims is undervalued. I took him at 207, I believe, in a rookie draft yesterday. And I am happy to grab him. I've got him as my wide receiver 5 as well, after those guys we talked about in the first round. Yeah, like you said, kind of just a squeaky clean prospect profile. And he went with the last pick in the second round, which it's kind of funny thinking that a one pick difference matters in terms of his potential success, but it puts him in a different bucket, of prospects. And he's honestly, I think he's in a pretty good situation. Depending on what Russell Wilson can be this year. But if he can bounce back, you could be looking at Mims as an every down starter, playing with Russell Wilson. I think he could fit in there. I know Cortland Sutton is there. He's really kind of shown some signs of decline post ACL. I'm not really that worried about him. So, it's really Judy and Mims in that Russell Wilson led offense, coached by Sean Payton. I see some parallels between Mims and Brandon Cooks, at least from like a size speed perspective. And so I think he could get that kind of a role. There's a lot to like, and I don't know why his ADP is lower. I would not be taking guys like Josh Downs over him, and I wouldn't be taking some of these other running backs that either went day 3 or ended up in bad landing spots, like a Tank Bigsby, for example, who I really liked. He just doesn't have the path to that immediate opportunity where I would take him over a Mims. So I would definitely be looking for Mims in the mid second. If you can position yourself in the draft in that 205, 206 range, you have a good chance to get him. And I think he's a solid pick there.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all that. I don't understand why a guy, I mean, I understand why a guy like Jonathan Mingo is going over him, but I would never be taking Jonathan Mingo over him.
Yeah, that's really gross. We'll talk about Mingo in a second. We're going to jump into the lightning round here because we are approaching an hour. So I basically 2 final questions. Let's just talk about a few prospects that we didn't mention yet. And let's go for some late round targets first. So we've talked about round 1. We've talked about round 2. You get into round 3, round 4. Who are guys in that range that you are targeting, or just guys that you're happy to get?
So in general, in late round drafts, I'm taking athletic running backs and athletic tight ends. So my round 3 guy right now is Israel Abanikanda. He has an ADP of 3.09. And I mean, he scored a 9.63 RAS score out of 10. He is an elite athlete. He actually compares very favorably to Brees Hall, just from an athlete size um,
Interesting.
standpoint, which is funny because, the team drafted him that has Brees Hall. But, These are the guys that you want later in your drafts. You want these running backs that have good workhorse size, they have good athleticism, and can pop given the chance. And we already saw, we talked about earlier, he might get the chance immediately. This guy, I love him in the third round. What's your third round guy, Paul?
Yeah. Well, I love Izzy. I haven't gotten him yet in a draft. He's eluding me. He's a very elusive running back, and he has eluded me in rookie drafts. But I do have another athletic running back for you. I like Chase Brown in the third round. He's typically available like in the early third. He went in the sixth round of the draft to the Cincinnati Bengals. Also an athletic running back. I don't think he's quite as good of a pure prospect as Abanikanda, but he does walk into a much murkier backfield situation because the Bengals basically only have Joe Mixon. Other than that, it's wide open. And Mixon's had some weird legal stuff. He has a pretty poor contract situation. It wouldn't shock me if Joe Mixon isn't on the Bengals starting week one, but even if he is, I think Brown will be able to carve out a role. And if anything were to happen, he would be the RB1 in a Joe Burrow offense, which is pretty exciting. So I like Brown. I also want to shout out Tucker Kraft, who you can probably get a little bit later. Maybe he's my fourth round guy, actually. But I do think Tucker Kraft is interesting. He was actually the second tight end drafted by the Packers. They took one in round 2 and round 3 for some reason, but he is actually better, more productive prospect than Luke Musgrave, who they took in round 2. And he's also a great athlete in his own right. So I think it's kind of interesting to bet on him to maybe be like the Mark Andrews to Luke Musgrave's Hayden Hurst, if you will. Kind of an interesting guy to throw a dart on. Do you have another late target that you could shout out for the people?
Yeah, round 4, I'm looking at Zach Kuntz, the tight end for the Jets, another Jets player apparently. His ADP is actually 5.08, so you can easily get him in the fourth round.
Wow.
I'm taking him comfortably in the late fourth. He scored a perfect 10 on RAS score. I mean, this is the exact prospect you want late in your draft. Something where if he gets the chance, he has the ability to pop. And if he does, his value is going to skyrocket. I don't want these day 3 wide receivers that have minimal upside, also minimal chance to see the field. At tight end, it's a shorter depth chart. They draft these guys. Some of these guys to be receivers, some of them to be blockers. They drafted this guy to be a receiver if he is put on the field. It's just,
yeah,
this is the guy I want at the end of the draft.
No, I totally agree. You can grab these tight ends late. You can put them on your taxi squad, leave them there the whole season, and just kind of see what you have in them. Most of the time, they're not going to be anything, but that's what these late round picks are. They're dart throws, right? So I like getting any of these athletic tight ends later on, especially the ones that did get draft capital. That's why I shouted out Kraft. But yeah, you can get Kuntz even later. And one last guy I'll mention is Evan Hull, who has a pretty solid like 3-down prospect profile. He was used as a receiver in college. He has good size. He's a good athlete. And he's another one of these running backs who landed behind a good young running back. He's now in Indianapolis. He's behind Jonathan Taylor. But I do think that they do have a lack of depth behind Taylor, and he could easily become that backup running back. He could even be kind of their Nyheim Hines replacement, change of pace guy. I don't think he'll have much standalone value, but he is bigger than a Hines. And so if Taylor were to go down, he would be much more likely to get a lot bigger portion of that rushing work along with the receiving. So he's an interesting guy you can stash on your bench. If you have these deep benches, it's a great idea to grab running backs like this that can pop for even 2 to 3 weeks at a time and that you can slot into your RB2 slot or your flex. It's just a much stronger bet than taking somebody like Xavier Hutchinson or Tyler Scott or Trey Palmer or whoever your pre-draft sleeper was. Those guys that went day 3, they just have such a difficult path to contributing to a wide receiver room. You're better off looking for these running backs and tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few years ago, nobody's going to remember this name, but Ryan Nall, running back for the Bears, he played 2 games. Before he even played his first game, the starter got hurt. He was named the starter, and I sold him for a second-round pick. Then was a couple years ago, everybody should remember Travis Fulgham. It took him like 4 or 5 games of having actually good production before anybody was actually willing to trade a second-round pick for him. These running backs, they're so usable and they score points so easily because they just need to be put on the field that their value just increases so quickly. These are the guys I want in the end of the draft.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great example. Totally agree with you there. Chris, I think we made it. We did it. We covered the rookie draft. We went over the first round, the second round. very briefly touched on the third and fourth, at least gave you some check boxes to look for, right? Athletic running backs, athletic tight ends. That's where you want to go.
Yep.
So I think we can wrap this thing up. I definitely want to give everybody your Twitter handle. Well, it's right there. Go follow Chris at Chris Miles 1017. Go follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. And of course, check out dynastyfootballfactory.com. That's where you're going to find my written content. That's where you're going to find Chris's content. You can even pick up the DFF rookie draft guide, which is full of Chris's thresholds. It's the only place really outside of his Twitter account that you can find the data from his model. And if you sign up for an annual membership, you also get to come hang out with us on Discord. We're in there all the time. We want to talk about rookie drafts. We want to talk about trades. Like, this is our hobby. So if you want to join and just join a really cool like group of guys talking about fantasy, go get the annual membership at DFF. Otherwise, Chris, what is it that you're going to be working on in the near future?
So right now, I'm just getting through my points per game projections for the rookie class. I also do points per game projections for year 2 and year 3 players, all using that database, all backed against the regression analysis, comparing what NFL stats are good for doing future projections. And then I've also kind of touched on projecting veteran NFL points per game. And I want to do more of that, taking actual NFL stats like yards per out run and target shares and touchdown shares and all that stuff, seeing what's correlative for your next season points per game. And hopefully I can get a pretty good model going there to, find some sleepers in your, cheap assets you can buy in Dynasty or sleepers in redraft leagues and stuff like that. Basically, you'll just find me doing anything where I can use numbers.
Love it. That sounds pretty fascinating. You guys should definitely keep an eye out for that. I know I look forward to stealing all of your conclusions and using them to form my own takes and giving you no credit. So, Chris, thank you for coming on to the factory tour. It's been great. Absolutely going to want to have you back some point this offseason to talk about whatever it might be, where these rookies are at now, or who we're targeting in drafts, or who we're trading for, whatever it might be. But I'll definitely be bringing you back. It's been a blast. For everybody out there, please subscribe to the Dynasty Football Factory YouTube channel if you like the show, like the video, and keep an eye out because this will be on Spotify pretty soon. Hopefully this show will be on Spotify pretty soon, and you can listen to it there as well. Again, I'm Paul Patterson. This has been the Factory Tour, and we'll see you all next week.